The heat was a physical weight. It pressed down on Firebase Kestrel, baking the dust into a fine, pale powder that coated everything in a shroud of beige. The air shimmered above the Hesco barriers, distorting the horizon into a wavering line of ochre and bleached blue. At the main checkpoint, the flag hung limp, its colors muted by the relentless sun. They wouldn't let her pass. It was a simple, unassailable fact, as solid as the concrete blast walls behind the guards. The initial dismissal had been predictable. The condescension that followed was routine. But beneath the surface of this tired standoff, a crisis was brewing miles away, a turning point that would render their rigid certainty irrelevant. Alara Vance stood before the raised barrier arm, her small duffel bag at her feet. She wore simple cargo pants and a plain gray t-shirt, clothes that allowed for movement but offered no hint of a uniform. Her silence was as profound as the desert's, a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the two soldiers blocking her path. Corporal Davis, young and eager to impress, held his rifle at a low ready, his knuckles white. Sergeant Reyes, a man whose authority was etched into the lines around his mouth, held her travel orders as if they were a piece of contaminated refuse. Civilian Specialist, Vance, Reyes read, his voice dripping with skepticism. Assignment, Tactical Liaison. That's a new 1 inch. He looked up from the flimsy paper, his eyes sweeping over her. She was of average height, with a lean, wiry build that hinted at strength but didn't broadcast it. Her face was a study in neutrality, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. There was nothing about her that screamed specialist, and everything that whispered bureaucratic error. "I'm expected," Alara said. Her voice was low and even, carrying no hint of frustration. It was a statement of fact, not a plea. "Everyone's expected by someone," Reyes retorted, folding the paper. "Doesn't mean they get in. We have protocols. I need confirmation from Colonel Madsen himself." He keyed his radio. "Watchtower, this is Gate 1. Patch me through to the CO." The static-laced response came a moment later. "Gate 1, this is Watchtower. CO is in the TOC busy. What's the issue?" "Got a civilian here, ma'am. Transfer orders look thin. Name's Vance. Says she's a tactical liaison." He practically spat the title. The silence on the other end stretched. Alara could picture the scene in the Tactical Operations Center, a frantic dance of data streams, drone feeds, and overlapping voices. A place where a lone civilian arriving unannounced was less than a minor inconvenience. She was an active threat to operational focus. Finally, a new voice crackled over the radio, sharp and irritated. It was Colonel Madsen. "Sergeant, I have a convoy pinned down and a sandstorm rolling in. I don't have time for administrative ghost stories. There is no civilian specialist assigned to this firebase. Send her back to Bagram on the next transport." End of story. Madsen out. The click of the transmission ending was deafening in the sudden quiet. Reyes gave Alara a look that was part triumph, part pity. "You heard the man. No entry." Corporal Davis shifted his weight, a flicker of unease in his eyes. He'd been watching her, not as a threat, but as a puzzle. She hadn't flinched, hadn't argued. She hadn't done anything but stand there, her gaze sweeping the perimeter with an unnerving, methodical stillness. It wasn't the stare of a lost tourist. It was the scan of a predator assessing a new hunting ground. "I'll wait," Alara said, her voice unchanged. She moved to the side, out of the direct path of the gate, and settled her back against a sandbagged emplacement. The dismissal was complete. She was now just a piece of scenery, a problem deferred. And in that stillness, she began to do what she did best: observe. Colonel Madsen's dismissal was the final brick in the wall. To him, she was an abstraction, a line of text in a garbled report from command that he'd likely already deleted. To Sergeant Reyes, she was an unwelcome disruption to the brutal but predictable rhythm of life at the firebase. He saw her civilian attire as a sign of weakness, her silence as a lack of confidence. He placed her in a neat box labeled "Problem," sealed it with regulations, and set it aside. "You can't wait here, ma'am," Reyes said, his tone hardening. He was a man who liked his world orderly, and her quiet, unmoving presence was a loose thread in the fabric of his control. This is a restricted area. The next transport isn't until 0600 tomorrow. You'll have to wait back at the airfield cantonment. Alara's gaze didn't waver from the distant mountains. The sandstorm Colonel Madsen mentioned will ground all air traffic within the hour. The cantonment is 2 clicks away. I'll be safer here. Her calm assertion, delivered with such certainty, momentarily threw Reyes off balance. He glanced at the sky. It was still a harsh, brilliant blue, but he knew the forecasts. She wasn't wrong. The knowledge irritated him more than a direct argument would have. It suggested she was paying attention, that she wasn't as clueless as he had assumed. "It's not your call," he snapped, recovering his footing. "Protocol is protocol." Corporal Davis watched the exchange, his initial certainty beginning to fray. He'd seen plenty of contractors and civilian staff come through. They were usually loud, self-important, and quick to name drop. This woman was different. Her stillness was an anomaly. While Reyes saw defiance, Davis was beginning to see something else. Patience. A deep, unnerving patience that felt more military than the sergeant's blustering. Alara finally turned her head, her eyes meeting Reyes's for the first time. They were a cool, steady gray, and in their depths there was no fear, no anger, only assessment. "Your western perimeter fence, Sergeant," she said, her voice still level, "has a 20-meter section where the taut wire sensor is partially buried by sand drift. A man could crawl over it in under 10 seconds without triggering an alert. The camera on Tower 3 has a blind spot from 310 to 325 degrees, obscured by the comms array. And Corporal Davis here has a habit of checking his watch every 90 seconds. A predictable pattern is a vulnerability." The blood drained from Reyes's face. Davis froze, his hand instinctively going his wrist. She had been here less than 15 minutes and had dissected their frontline security with the detached precision of a surgeon. She wasn't just looking, she was analyzing, deconstructing. Reyes found his voice a strained, angry rasp. "You threatening my base? I'm explaining why I'm safer here than walking to the cantonment," Alara replied, turning her gaze back to the horizon. "The storm will provide cover for anyone who knows this terrain, and someone out there clearly does." The implication hung in the dry air between them. The pinned-down convoy wasn't a random incident. It was calculated. Her words stripped away their sense of security, replacing it with a cold prickle of doubt. Before Reyes could formulate a response, his radio squawked to life, not with a routine call, but with a frantic, panicked shout. "TOC, this is Striker 1. We're taking effective fire. Position compromised. I say again, sniper fire, origin unknown. 2 casualties, EOD Tech is down. He's hit bad." The voice was young, terrified. The structured world of protocols and gate procedures shattered in an instant. Reyes's face went rigid with professional concern, his personal conflict with Alara forgotten. He grabbed his radio, shouting for details, for coordinates, for anything that could turn the chaos into actionable intelligence. Colonel Madsen's voice cut through the noise, strained but commanding. "All units, hold your positions. Striker 1, give me a sit rep. Where's the fire coming from?" "We don't know, sir. It's everywhere. It's like he's in the rocks in the sun. We can't get a beat on him." The dismissal was now a distant memory. Alara Vance was no longer a problem to be handled. She was simply a silent witness to the sudden, violent unraveling of their control. She remained by the sandbags, a statue of calm amidst the rising tide of fear, her assessment of the checkpoint's vulnerabilities now feeling less like a criticism and more like a chilling prophecy. While the soldiers at the gate were consumed by the immediate radio traffic, Alara continued her silent inventory. Her mind, honed by years of operating in environments where the smallest detail could mean the difference between life and death, processed the world around her not as a series of objects, but as a system of interconnected variables. The sun, now past its zenith, was beginning its slow descent toward the western ridge. She noted its angle, calculating the way it would cast long, deceptive shadows across the valley where the convoy was trapped. The sniper wasn't everywhere. He was using the glare and the terrain to his advantage. A classic force multiplier. She observed the wind, not just feeling it on her skin, but watching its effect on the dust devils dancing in the distance. The patterns told her about air currents, about how sound would travel. A gunshot's echo, if you knew how to listen, could become a map. Her gaze shifted to the men themselves. Sergeant Reyes, for all his bluster, was a creature of the system. He was reacting, not anticipating. His hands, though steady on his radio, were locked in a grip of tension. He was following his training, but the training hadn't accounted for this specific brand of chaos. Corporal Davis was worse. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He was imagining the men in that convoy, picturing them as he had been just hours before, bored, hot, and safe. The illusion was shattered, and fear was rushing into the vacuum. Inside the TOC, a similar scene was playing out on a larger scale. Alara could hear Madsen's clipped, frustrated commands even from 50 yards away. "Give me drone footage. I want eyes on that ridge. Where's the counter-sniper team? Why isn't our comms link with Stryker stable?" She already knew the answer to the last question. The massive rock formation between the base and the convoy's location created a communication shadow. Their primary relay tower was on the wrong side of the massif. They were relying on signal bounce, which was notoriously unreliable, especially with an approaching storm front disrupting the atmosphere. It was a basic topographical oversight, a fatal one. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, not in rest, but in focus. She built a three-dimensional map in her mind, layering the sparse information from the radio chatter onto her own direct observations. The convoy's last known coordinates, the location of the sun, the shape of the terrain, the direction of the wind, the comms dead zone. The pieces clicked into place, forming a bleak but clear picture. The sniper wasn't on the main ridge everyone was focused on. That was too obvious, and the angles were wrong for a position of sustained dominance. He was lower, nestled in a small, weathered outcrop that the drone operators would easily mistake for insignificant rockfall. From there, he could command the entire stretch of road, using the sun as a blinding shield and the echo from the larger cliffs to disguise his true location. The IED had been the bait, forcing the convoy to stop in the perfect kill zone. The wounded Yodi tech was the masterstroke, ensuring they couldn't easily clear the obstacle and escape. This wasn't a random insurgent with a lucky shot. This was a professional, a hunter, and he was slowly, methodically dismantling Stryker 1. Alara pushed herself off the sandbag wall. Her movements were fluid, economical. She walked toward the checkpoint, her steps silent in the dust. Rez, deep in a tense radio exchange, didn't notice her until she was standing right beside him. "Give me the radio, Sergeant," she said. It wasn't a request. The pressure inside the TOC had reached a critical point. The room, normally a hub of controlled energy, was now a maelstrom of barely contained panic. Maps were strewn across the central table. Drone feeds flickered on the main screen, showing nothing but sun-blasted rock, and young lieutenants shouted conflicting information into their headsets. Colonel Madsen stood at the center of it all, his face a grim mask of frustration. His command was bleeding out, one bullet at a time, and he was powerless to stop it. "I want that sniper found," he roared, slamming a fist on the table. "He's picking my men apart." "Sir, the drone can't loiter," an analyst reported, his voice tight. "The wind shear off the ridge is too strong. We get a glimpse, and then we're fighting for control." "Stryker 1 is down to half-strength comms," another officer added. "The signal is degrading fast." Into this vortex of failure stepped Alara. Reyes and Davis trailed behind her, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity. They had tried to stop her, but her quiet, implacable certainty had overridden Reyes's authority. He hadn't given her the radio. She had simply taken it. She walked directly to the main communications console, ignoring the stunned looks from the staff officers. Her eyes scanned the frequency displays and signal strength meters. "You're using the wrong relay," she stated, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. "You're bouncing the signal. The sniper knows your comms are weak. It's part of his plan." Madsen turned, his face thunderous. "Who the hell are you?" "I gave an order. Sergeant, get this civilian out of my TOC." Reyes took a hesitant step forward, but Alara didn't even look at the colonel. Her focus was entirely on the problem. "There's a civilian comms tower on the Tellman Ridge, 20 clicks north," she said, pointing to a spot on the holographic map. "It's inactive, but the parabolic dish is still intact. Patch one of your drones through it. Use it as a passive bounce reflector. It will give you a clean, unbroken line of sight to the convoy." The comms officer stared at her, then at his screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Theoretically, the angle is right. It could work." "It will work," Alara corrected him gently. Madsen was speechless. The idea was simple, elegant, and something his entire team of highly trained specialists had missed. It required thinking outside their prescribed military channels. "Do it," he finally choked out. As the officer rerouted the signal, Alara turned her attention to the main map. "Your sniper isn't on the main ridge," she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "Everyone is looking there. That's the decoy. He's here." She pointed to a small, insignificant cluster of rocks halfway down the opposing slope. "The sun is at his back, blinding your spotters. The wind is carrying the sound of his rifle up to the main ridge, making it echo. You're hearing the echo, not the shot. How can you possibly know that?" Madsen demanded, his anger replaced by a grudging, bewildered respect. "Because that's where I would be," she answered simply. "Now, have your drone stop looking for a heat signature. He'll be cold, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Look for a distortion, a patch of air that seems to shimmer incorrectly right at the edge of that rock formation." The comms officer suddenly shouted, "Sir, I got Striker 1. Clear as a bell. The relay is working." On the main screen, a drone feed, now stable and clear, swung towards the spot Alara had indicated. The operator zoomed in, his hands working the controls with renewed purpose. The image resolved into a jumble of brown and gray rocks. "Nothing. There's nothing there," the analyst said, disappointed. "Wait," Alara whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Look, to the left of the main shadow. The light bends." The operator adjusted the focus, and then they all saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible ripple in the air, like heat haze on a summer road. It was the outline of a rifle barrel and a scope, perfectly camouflaged, aimed directly at the trapped convoy. A collective gasp went through the TOC. They'd been searching for a man. She had taught them to look for a ghost. "Target acquired," the drone operator said, his voice filled with awe. "Coordinates locked. Requesting fire mission." "Send it," Madsen ordered, his eyes never leaving Alara. The intervention was a quiet earthquake. It didn't rearrange the room, but it shattered the foundations of every assumption made that day. When the fire mission complete confirmation came over the radio, followed moments later by Striker 1's jubilant report that the sniper fire had ceased, a wave of relief washed through the TOC. But it was followed by a deeper, more unsettling current of awe directed at the civilian woman standing silently by the console. Colonel Madsen stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The dismissal, the condescension, it all felt like a fool's arrogance in retrospect. He had seen a problem. She had seen a solution. His team had seen chaos. She had seen a pattern. He had been playing checkers while she was playing a game he didn't even know existed. The whispers started almost immediately. A low murmur spread through the room as operators and analysts looked from their screens to Alara and back again. Who is she? How did she know? She saw the whole damn thing in her head. Out at the gate, Sergeant Reyes and Corporal Davis had listened to the entire exchange over the local comms net. Reyes stood with his radio in hand, his mouth slightly agape. The woman he had dismissed as a bureaucratic nuisance had just saved an entire squad from half a base away, using nothing but logic and a map. He looked at the section of fence she had pointed out, the blind spot in the camera coverage. They weren't just observations, they were tactical probes. She had assessed his defenses and found them wanting in the time it took him to make a phone call. His authority felt like a paper shield. Davis, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of validation. The unease he'd felt, the sense that she was more than she appeared, had been right. He watched her now on the TOC's security feed, standing perfectly still amidst the celebrating soldiers, an island of calm in a sea of relief. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't accepting congratulations. She was already moving on to the next problem, her expression as neutral as it had been at the gate. Madsen cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. He walked over to Alara, his posture no longer confrontational, but cautious. Inquisitive. "Ms. Vance," he began, the name feeling inadequate on his tongue. "You have my gratitude. You saved the lives of my men. I was wrong to dismiss you." It was a rare admission for a man of his rank, and it hung in the air, heavy with significance. Alara simply nodded. "The threat isn't over, Colonel. The sniper is neutralized," Madsen countered, confused. "He was the trigger man," she explained, her gaze fixed on the map. "He wasn't the architect. The convoy is still immobilized. The primary threat was never the sniper. It was the IED. He was just a herding dog. Now that he's gone, you have a new problem. The people who built that device know you're coming for it." She looked at him directly. "And your only EOD specialist is bleeding out in the back of a striker." The brief moment of celebration evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of the situation. She hadn't just solved one problem. She had uncovered a deeper, more dangerous one. The shift was complete. No one in that room saw a lost civilian anymore. They saw a weapon of a different kind, and they were beginning to wonder, with a mix of fear and reverence, just what it was she had been sent here to do. The mood in the TOC, which had soared with the elimination of the sniper, now plummeted back to a tense, grim silence. The drone feed refocused on the disabled convoy. The lead vehicle was canted at an unnatural angle, its front right wheel obliterated by the initial blast. In front of it, nestled in the dirt like a venomous insect, was the secondary device. The drone's camera zoomed in, the image stabilizing to reveal a terrifyingly complex array of wires, pressure plates, and what looked like multiple artillery shells linked together. "It's a daisy chain," the EOD liaison officer said, his voice strained as he studied the feed. "A big one. Multiple triggers. Looks like it has an anti-tamper mechanism. It's beyond anything we've seen in this sector." "Can we disable it remotely?" Madsen asked, his hope already fading. "Negative, sir." The initiator looked shielded, and with that kind of setup, a countercharge would likely detonate the whole chain, taking the entire convoy with it. It needs to be disarmed by hand. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air, an impossible task. Their only technician was wounded, and the men of Striker 1 were infantry, not bomb disposal experts. Evacuating the wounded was impossible with the road blocked. They were trapped, a stationary target waiting for the next phase of the enemy's plan. Into this paralysis, Alara spoke. "I have some experience." The words were so quiet, so understated, that for a moment they didn't register. Madsen turned to her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "Experience? With what? Reading manuals?" The old skepticism was trying to reassert itself, a defense mechanism against the impossible. "With taking things apart," Alara replied, her gaze unwavering. There was a long, tense silence as Madsen weighed his options. On one hand, sending an unknown, unvetted civilian to handle a sophisticated explosive device was an insane, career-ending breach of every protocol he had ever known. On the other, his men were dying. She had been right about the sniper, right about the comms. Her logic had been flawless. What she was right about this, too. "Get her a kit," he said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And a vehicle." "Davis," he barked into his radio, his eyes finding the young corporal on the security monitor. "You're driving." The trip to the convoy was a high-speed, bone-jarring ride across the desert flats. Davis gripped the wheel of the light tactical vehicle, his knuckles white. Beside him, Alara was a portrait of serenity. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the base. She was checking the contents of the EOD kit, her movements economical and precise. She wasn't just inspecting the tools. She was reacquainting herself with them, like a musician picking up a long-neglected instrument. They arrived at the site to a scene of controlled chaos. Medics were working on the wounded in the relative cover of the armored vehicles. The remaining soldiers of Stryker 1 held a tight perimeter, their eyes scanning the silent, menacing rocks. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and blood. Alara slid out of the vehicle, the EOD kit slung over her shoulder. She walked directly to the IED, her steps measured and calm. She didn't hesitate, didn't pause. She knelt in the dust a few feet from the device, her body language radiating a focus so intense it seemed to bend the air around her. Davis watched, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had expected to see fear, or at least some sign of tension. He saw none. He saw only a deep, profound concentration, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Alara laid her tools out on a piece of canvas. She studied the bomb, her head tilted slightly. Her breathing was slow and even a quiet rhythm in the tense silence. She wasn't just looking at the wires and the shells. She was reading a story. She saw the builder's intent, the layers of deception, the cruel logic of the trap. She began to work. Her hands were steady, her movements deft and certain. She chose a pair of wire cutters, but not for the obvious, brightly colored wires. Instead, she made a small incision in the plastic casing of the primary detonator. She slipped the slender blades of a probe inside, her touch as delicate as a surgeon's. The soldiers watched, mesmerized. They had never seen anything like it. This wasn't the methodical, by-the-book process they had seen in training films. This was an art form. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sun beat down, and sweat trickled down Davis's face, but Alara seemed immune to the heat, to the pressure. She worked in a silent bubble of pure competence. As she leaned forward to get a better angle, the sleeve of her t-shirt, already damp with sweat, rode up her left forearm. For a moment, it was just another detail in the high-stakes tableau. But then Davis saw it. A tattoo. It was dark ink against her skin, a stylized design that was both elegant and brutal. It depicted a single raven, its wings partially spread, its beak open in a silent cry. Clutched in one of its talons was a single, shattered link of a chain. It was just a tattoo, but as Alara's fingers finally closed around the core wiring of the trigger mechanism and gave a firm, decisive pull, a chain of events was set in motion that had nothing to do with explosives and everything to do with a past that was about to step out of the shadows. The click of the disarmed mechanism was almost inaudibly soft, yet it echoed across the valley like a thunderclap of relief. Alara sat back on her heels, taking a single, slow breath before methodically packing her tools. The soldiers of Stryker 1 let out a ragged, collective cheer. They were alive. They were safe. By the time Alara's vehicle returned to Firebase Kestrel, news of her feat had spread like wildfire. The story had already taken on mythical proportions. The mysterious civilian who had talked a drone onto a sniper and disarmed an impossible bomb with her bare hands. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the soldiers she passed fell silent, their gazes a mixture of awe and confusion. She ignored them, her face impassive, and headed for the TOC to give her report. At that same moment, a Black Hawk helicopter was descending toward the base, kicking up a furious storm of dust. It bore the insignia of a 2-star general. General Thorne, the regional commander, had been en route to inspect a forward operating base when he was diverted by the reports of the attack on the convoy and its miraculous resolution. He was a man known for his sharp mind and his intolerance for incompetence. He wanted to know who had failed and who had succeeded. He strode into the TOC just as Alara was finishing her debrief with Colonel Madsen. The room snapped to attention. Thorne was a tall, imposing man with ice-blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interruption as a flustered Madsen recounted the day's events, from the initial sniper attack to the intervention of the civilian specialist. He gave credit where it was due, his earlier arrogance replaced by a raw, unvarnished respect. And she disarmed the device herself. General, Madsen concluded. save the entire convoy. Thorn's gaze fell upon Alara. She stood at ease, her clothes covered in dust, a smudge of grease on her cheek. She met his analytical stare without flinching. A civilian did this? Thorn asked, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. Impressive. What's your name, ma'am? Vance, sir. Alara Vance. Well, Ms. Vance, on behalf of the United States Army, I thank you for your service today. Your courage was, he trailed off. His eyes, sharp and practiced, had dropped to her arm. Her sleeve was still pushed up slightly from her work, and the tattoo was clearly visible. The stylized raven, the shattered chain. General Thorn froze. It was not a dramatic, theatrical gesture, but a sudden, absolute cessation of all movement. The hand he had been raising to offer a handshake stopped in midair. The words died on his lips. His face, a moment before a mask of professional command, became a canvas of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, profound recognition. The air in the TOC grew thick and heavy. Every officer in the room felt the sudden, inexplicable shift in their commander. Madsen stared, confused by the general's reaction. It was just a tattoo, but to General Thorn, it was a key. It unlocked a ghost file buried so deep in the archives of special operations that it was officially listed as a myth. It was an insignia that had never been worn on a uniform, only etched into the skin of the handful of operatives who had survived the program it represented. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely a whisper, a ragged sound that was utterly out of character. The Raven of Kandahar. The name fell into the stunned silence of the room. It meant nothing to Madsen or his men, but to Thorn, it was the stuff of legend. A call sign whispered in classified briefings, a name associated with missions that were never acknowledged and successes that were never celebrated. He took a half-step closer, his eyes locked on the tattoo, as if seeing a phantom. Project Chimera, he breathed. The words meant only for her. Section 0. We were told you were all gone. We were told you were a ghost. Alara's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something ancient and weary passed through her eyes. Ghosts don't die, General, she said softly. We just find new places to haunt. The revelation hung in the air, electric and incomprehensible to everyone but the two of them. Project Chimera was the official designation for a program that didn't exist. It took individuals from every branch of the Special Forces, stripped them of their names and ranks, and forged them into something new. Deniable operators designed to solve impossible problems. They were the surgeons sent in when the blunt instruments of traditional warfare had failed. They had no official records, no dog tags, no chain of command. Their only identifier was the tattoo, a symbol of their unit, the Ravens. The shattered chain link signified their unique status, forever bound to the mission, yet broken from the conventional military structure. General Thorn understood. He understood the preternatural calm, the impossible tactical analysis, the flawless execution under pressure. It wasn't just experience. It was the result of a training regimen so brutal and selective that only a dozen operatives had ever completed it. And he was looking at one of them. He slowly straightened up, his posture shifting from that of a superior officer addressing a civilian to something else entirely. It was a posture of profound, almost reverent respect. He was no longer looking at Ms. Vance, the civilian specialist. He was looking at the Raven, a living legend he thought had been lost to the shadows of the war. He turned his back on Alara, facing the assembled officers of the TOC. Colonel Madsen, Sergeant Reyes, and the others watched, bewildered, as the general's face settled into an expression of iron solemnity. Colonel, Thorn said, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for question. This is not a civilian. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This is an asset whose clearance level and operational history demand our utmost respect. He then did something no one in the room had ever seen a two-star general do for someone without rank or uniform. He pivoted on his heel to face Alara directly. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a slow, deliberate, and perfectly executed salute. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was a salute of deference. A salute from a commander to a warrior of a higher, unseen order. Colonel Madsen's eyes widened. He was a man who lived and breathed by the rigid hierarchy of military protocol. A general did not salute a subordinate, let alone a civilian. But Thorne's action was a command more powerful than any verbal order. He instantly understood. The woman before him was someone far beyond his comprehension, someone to whom even a general owed a gesture of profound respect. Without a second's hesitation, Madsen's own hand snapped to his brow, his body rigid with attention. The ripple effect was instantaneous. Sergeant Reyes, standing near the doorway, saw his colonel and the general saluting. His own confusion and previous antagonism vanished, replaced by the ingrained reflex of a career soldier following the lead of his command. He executed a sharp salute. Corporal Davis, his eyes wide with awe, did the same. One by one, every soldier in the TOC, from his senior officers to the junior analysts, turned to face Alara Vance and rendered a salute. No one knew why. They didn't know the meaning of the tattoo or the name Project Chimera. They only knew that their general, a man they revered and feared, had deemed her worthy of this ultimate sign of military respect. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the electronics. It was filled with 24 uniformed soldiers, all holding a salute to one quiet, unassuming woman in dusty cargo pants. Alara did not salute back. She was not a part of their world, not anymore. She simply stood and received their gesture, her gray eyes holding a deep, ancient sorrow. It was the burden of the ghost to be seen, finally, for what she was, and to know the profound isolation that came with it. The respect was earned, paid for in scars no one could see, but it was a heavy mantle to wear. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The oppressive heat of the day was finally beginning to recede, replaced by the cool, dry air of the desert evening. On a small bluff overlooking Firebase Kestrel, Alara Vance stood alone, a solitary silhouette against the fading light. The chaos of the day had settled into the quiet, efficient hum of a base at work. The wounded had been stabilized, the convoy was being recovered, and a fragile sense of order had been restored. The crunch of boots on gravel announced an arrival. She didn't turn. She knew who it was. General Thorne came to stand beside her, not too close, affording her a respectful distance. He held out a metal canteen. "Water," he said. It wasn't an order, just a simple offer. She took it and drank, the cool liquid a welcome relief. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the first stars begin to prick the darkening sky. "Your transfer orders," Thorne said finally, his voice low. "They weren't a mistake. I arranged them." Alara looked at him, a question in her eyes. "We've been having problems in this sector," he explained, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Attacks that are too precise, too well-planned. Ambushes that anticipate our every move." It felt familiar. It had the signature of a craftsman. I started digging into old, archived intelligence, looking for patterns. I found whispers that one of you might still be active. Not on our side. The implication was chilling. Another Raven, gone rogue. "So you pulled a ghost from the files to hunt a ghost," Alara stated, her voice flat. "I didn't know it was you," Thorne admitted. "The request was sent up a chain so high, it barely exists. All I knew was that they were sending me a specialist. I never imagined they would send the original. The first, the Raven of Kandahar." He shook his head in lingering disbelief. "Your official record says you died in an ambush outside of Marja 10 years ago." "That part of me did," Alara said, her voice distant. She handed the canteen back. Her sleeve had fallen back into place, covering the tattoo, hiding the Raven once more. "I'm a liaison now, General. Here to consult." Thorne understood the meaning behind her words. Her official cover was her shield. She would operate in the open, but her true purpose would remain in the shadows. "Your cover is whatever you need it to be," he assured her. "Colonel Madsen has been fully briefed on your authority. You will have whatever you require." No questions asked. Alara gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the confirmation she needed. Her war had not ended. It had just followed her into the quiet places she had tried to build a life. Thorne prepared to leave, but hesitated. Vance, Alara, thank you. For today, and for everything else. She said nothing, merely watched as he walked back toward the lights of the base, leaving her once again in the solitude she knew so well. She remained on the bluff as night consumed the desert, the wind gently stirring her hair. Below, Firebase Kestrel was a small island of light and order in a vast, dark sea of uncertainty. She was an outsider here, a creature of a different world. But she was their ghost now, their silent guardian. The tattoo on her arm felt warm against her skin, not a brand of the past, but a symbol of an enduring promise. The raven was no longer haunting a memory. She was on the hunt. The dignity she carried was not born of the salutes or the newfound respect, but from the quiet, unyielding acceptance of her duty. The mission, as always, was all that remained.